So by the end of it all, I looked at the list and I realized that the person that I was describing on the list was Christ.
Whew.
And I was just like, oh my God, this is you,
Wow.
Jesus. This is you. So who qualifies for this? You
I'm
know?
saying though, like,
'Cause
who would you find that actually lines up with all those things?
exactly. And so I started to say to myself, okay, if this person is aspiring to be like Christ, if this person is Christ, if
Mm-hmm.
I were to ask that person, I want you to be all these things on this list, once again, can this person ask all these things of me?
Wow.
And from this list, because it's like Christ, can Christ look at me and say, I'm being a reflection of him as well? So going back to that idea you were saying before about that mirror image,
Right.
when you think about Adam and Eve, he says bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh.
Yes.
And beyond the whole two of a kind idea,
Right.
but as far as character is concerned, they were alike. They were mirrored images of each other because they were
Right.
mirrored images of Christ
Yes.
from the one that they were created by.
Right.
And so in the same way, we should be striving to not meet just any list, but meet the characteristics of Christ. And I just thought that was like the most amazing lesson Christ has ever really, one of the most,
Yeah.
So,
That's crazy because
yeah.
I mean, who honestly is better to show you, first of all, what you need as a person, and then much less the person you're going to be looking for, who better to look to as an example than Christ himself? And, one of the biggest aspects of a relationship is love.
Right.
And one thing I absolutely love about Christ is that he always gives an example. And one of his greatest examples of love, of course, is the cross. And when I think about the human race and how, it started, and Adam and Eve, of course, we know the decision with the fruit.
Right.
And, God at that point could have allowed, sin to take its course. And, if he allowed us to, keep being born and everything after we die, that's it. But somehow he loves us enough that he's like, you know what? I still want to give every single person an opportunity. They can choose me and they'll live with me forever. They might die on this earth, but they'll have that chance to live with me eternally, or then they could choose the latter fate. So he shows a selfless love by sending his son. And his son, we see his story on earth. He's had human moments where he's like, you know what, God, if I don't have to do this right now, please take this cup from me. But if it's necessary, I will do it. And there's no greater love than that a man will lay down his life for his friends. So I think we have to look at Christ. Christ was very selfless. He was very patient with people. I mean, look at the people he associated with. The disciples would be like, and the Pharisees and the Jews would be like, do you see like who he's associating himself with? Like the likes of Mary Magdalene and Judas is in the mix. You have tax collectors. Like you have all these different types of people that godly people wouldn't be around. But you know what? You know what love says? Love doesn't look at just what you can see on the outside. It looks at what it can do for you also. So you know what? We have to become like Christ, number one.
Right.
And that's a big task.
It is a big task.
It really is.
But it's worth it. And when you're prioritizing Christ as number one, not saying like he's an item on a checklist, but literally putting him first.
Seek ye first.
Seek ye first. And everything will be added. Right. So, like, when we look for the attention or for the acceptance of that person we want, whether it be a
Right.
boyfriend or a girlfriend. When we start idolizing and putting that person in front of God and mix up that priority list, right, it becomes a mess, because now men are manipulating through what they say, or females are manipulating by what they do,
Right,
in order to achieve that God-sized hole, filling that God-sized hole with that person.
Person.
You
And
know
is
what I'm
that
saying?
possible?
It's not
It's
possible,
not.
but we start doing our best to serve, and we do our best to serve the idea of what they think is the best standard, instead
Right,
of what
right.
God thinks is the best standard, which is his son. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So whether that person, we think, okay, in order to get that person, we have to look good, we have to wear this or have this long hair, or
Right.
whatever the case may be, or short hair,
Right.
Halle Berry,
Yes.
that's nice.
Yeah.
But like, we start trying to fit the ideal of that person versus the ideal of what Christ has. But if we're both trying to, like you were saying before, if we're both trying to achieve being more like Christ, then that image of the world is then lessened, and the image of Christ is now heightened,
Exactly.
and exalted.
Exactly. So, I think it's a good idea to, almost have like a step-by-step process with relationships, and have a plan, inspired by God. Of course, you don't want to make it on your own. But I think number one thing is definitely work on building that relationship
Right.
with him, because without him, you can really do nothing. He needs to help us as individuals really see what love is like, what we need to work on to even prepare ourselves for another person. So we really have to focus on him, let him bring us into a new being, into his
Right.
likeness, and then, only then, can we be ready for another person. But one thing I see a lot, I think, is that we try to do what we think God would say or do in a situation, minus the commitment of a relationship with him. And I'm going to try to break that down
Yeah, 'cause I
a
was just
little bit.
like, what?
That's something that just came to me because, in church, we hear about, let's be equally yoked. And,
Right.
and equally yoked doesn't just say the same religion, but same values, right? But how do you even know what values you need to be looking for, or what you should be writing down without that relationship? If you just go based off of what you think, and we know if the human brain only uses 10%, how
Right.
much can we really do? So it's all about relationship building, and only through that can we ever even begin to have a clue
Right.
about what to look
Right.
for.
Seek ye first, and there's this one verse that I've heard you read before. It was in Colossians. I
Oh,
think.
Colossians 3. You know what? Isn't it something that I got it right here?
Oh
So it basically says, since God chose you to be the holy people he loves, you must clothe yourself with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. Above all, clothe yourself with love, which binds us all together in perfect harmony.
That's okay. What I love about that is, it's ultimately saying to have unconditional love. By using that love and letting yourself be last, you're able to serve each other once you have served God. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's like when you love God, you end up creating an umbrella with him, and then other things starts working underneath that, right?
Right.
So going back to the whole idea with the list thing, we think about who can satisfy that list. No one but Christ, right?
Right.
But when it's time to look for that person, you're no longer looking for that perfect person, because that perfect person is Christ. You're looking for someone who's striving
Oh,
to
wow.
meet that. And then with that, obviously, it comes with patience, because no one's perfect. And so when you're able to look at yourself, and I know it took a while for me to become the person who I am now, and it's still gonna take time.
Process never stops.
The process
Yeah.
never stops, but you're patient with yourself. You have to be patient with yourself, and you're looking for someone to be patient on your process as well. But the goal is that each of us are trying to be like Christ. We're aspiring to, we're trying hard to be like Christ. I remember one time my friend was like, Monique, I want to be so in love with Christ that I'm so focused on him, and then God's like, oh, here you go, here's your gift, here's your man. And she'll be like,